And welcome back, college hockey fans. It is NCHC on MNCAA along with Max Veech. I am Nick Maxson along with you. We are in the final stretch here, Max, where all of our teams in the conference are making their bids to, shall we say, play their best hockey going into the NCHC tournament, which is just about a month away. If you can believe that already, how crazy is that? Trends are continuing. Trends are bucking all across college hockey as well as in the NCHC. We'll dive through all of that. But Max, thank you for joining us. You're traveling for work, and good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, it's always fun to jump on. I'm not as ecstatic about travel as I once was. I don't get to go to the fancy parts of the country. I'm not one of the guys that gets to go out and golf and call it a day of work, and more power to those guys. But I always look forward to jumping on these calls because it means I've got something to do that's not sitting in a Applebee's bar or something stupid like that. So jumping on and talking hockey, especially with you, always a good time. So I'll take that any day of the week.
Applebee's man after 9, the half price apps. Hard to beat that, honestly.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, I didn't mean to disparage or degrade Applebee's. It's got its place, and it is in the parking lot of hotels, and it is for high schoolers to go and get half off apps so they stay out of trouble doing other things. And it is, whatever. Is it a fancy establishment? Nobody has that as the, shades over their eyes and believing that anymore. But I wish they would turn a corner, kind of like Chili's has in the last couple of
That's
months
true.
or year or something. They've kind of rebranded, and not even a rebrand. They've just repaired their image so much more. And credit
Yep.
to their social media manager because I've walked past a couple of them. There's one by my house, and I'm like, damn, you know what? Chili's kind of sounds pretty good. Haven't dipped my toe in yet, but it's coming. I promise you that.
The bug has been planted, right?
Yeah,
The
it
seed
certainly
is
has.
there. It's growing. It's just a matter of time before it sprouts some seeds of reward for Chili's and the franchises, right?
Yep.
Um, so let's put it this way. Much like your analogy with both Applebee's and Chili's, right? Is that college hockey teams plant their seeds early in the preseason, hope that they continues to grow, and to essentially, show us a beautiful bouquet at the end of the season, right?
Right.
Um, Sometimes you get quick growth in the early months. Sometimes it's a slower grow. But it's around this time of the year where you want to be reaping what you sow, right? And let's just say this: some teams are, and some teams are not. So, Max, let's start with the Bulldogs here. A tough weekend, unfortunately, for the Bulldogs and really both of our teams, and we'll discuss that as well. But again, Bulldogs put up a fight. There are
Yeah.
some good trends that are happening with the Bulldogs. Just ultimately, the better team won this weekend.
Yeah, it hurts me to say it, but you're absolutely right. Better team won. UMD, if you look at the scoreboard, it looks like they got kind of trounced both nights. A 4-1 loss on Friday, 5-2 loss on Saturday. If you're, like I said, just scoreboard watching, you're thinking that they had a really bad weekend when, in fact, they had 40 shots on Friday and 52 on Saturday. And another, viewpoint of this could say that the, goalied them. And they've done it more than one time this year. I mean, I think they did it to Minnesota early in that icebreaker tournament. They've done it to I'm blanking on the other sweeps that they've had, but he's a great goaltender, and I mean he's putting up incredible numbers, especially when you're getting that volume of shots and you're only letting in 1 and 2. And that second one on Saturday was with like 30 seconds left in the game or something. So to have that bolster your stats is incredible. And they're a big physical team. They kind of imposed their will a little bit. UMD got away from maybe what they were doing well in the Denver series 2 weekends ago, and what they were kind of building off of leading up to that in a couple of the other splits. But I don't think it was a bad weekend overall for them. I think there's certainly things that they need to learn from and grow from. But the team in general looked pretty good. Like the loss on Friday, the third period when they were down only one, they were still putting up shot after shot after shot. I think they outshot them 18-9, doubled them up in that third period, and they just couldn't figure out a goalie. And that just it sucks. But and there's no moral victories. I think I said this online too, but it's something that you don't feel bad about necessarily.
Yep.
It certainly doesn't help the poor situation that they're in either. but it's something that I think is going to help this team grow. And maybe they learn from it next year if they're playing another team or game like this one. And I promise you, in the NCHC, there's going to be plenty more opportunities to do that. So some of the positives. Well, there's a couple empty netters in there as well that make it seem more lopsided. But some of the positives, it's the same, 3-4 names that we see over and over and over again. I think Max Plante and Jason Shaugabay had some form of involvement in every goal, every point that was scored. Max didn't put one in this weekend, but assisted on all of them. Shaugabay assisted on 2 and put one in himself. Zam Plante put one in, and I think Arnott put one in on Friday. And it's that younger team that is building something together. And fingers crossed that those guys can all stick around, because they're going to be a real threat when you start being able to see some of that size that they can take advantage of, rather than just relying on the stick handling and skill to get around some of these guys. So despite the record and despite another sweep that we've got to deal with, I'm very hopeful for UMD's future, both the rest of this season and moving forward as well.
So Max, that brings me to a kind of a curious question, right? Because let's just say that 60 days ago, so we go back to early December before St. Cloud plays North Dakota up in Grand Forks. These two teams were in two different positions. So when I say two teams, I mean both Duluth and St. Cloud. And now there's a lot of mirror images of how these teams are. And here's what I mean by that. They're kind of being led by their youth, the upperclassmen. I think both coaching staffs would say it honestly. They kind of wish they had a little bit more from on both sides of the puck. Both teams could get great goaltending, but at the end of the day, they can't stand on their head every single night, right? Is that? Do you think I'm onto something there? That these two teams, as for whatever reason, throughout the years of the NC, just have seemed to be tied at the hip, but they seem to be more similar this year.
Yeah, I think they certainly are more similar this year. I think it was last year, I guess at a couple of different points there. St. Cloud has been in that national media, getting some national attention, and UMD maybe started the season there but fell off pretty quickly, and St. Cloud just lingered around a little bit longer before failing to make a tournament last year or going into a complete free fall this year. So it has been ultimately very similar results, just different paths to get there. And I do think that you're kind of nailed it in terms of what they've been relying on in the youth scoring, both when Ben Steeves was here a couple of years ago, for the last couple of years, I should say, and then the freshman group this year, and then relying on stellar goaltending to steal you games. And we don't have a I don't know what to say. We don't have a goalie that's going to get a 950 save percentage, which I think is the leader in the nation right now. We don't have goaltenders who are going to get, 10 shutouts a season. We don't have, we play in a different conference where that's going to be a lot harder to do. So I just find it like you have to model your game a little bit differently, maybe when you have these teams, and that's something that these coaches might not have had to do recently, and might be something that they're struggling with. Not that they can't figure it out, but when UMD and St. Cloud have had their most success, they've had a really balanced team of both experienced players and a couple of younger guys chipping in there. And I think that makes sense. You see that in who wins the national championship every year. When Quinnipiac did it, they had one of the oldest teams in the league. Denver had a relatively old team. Like they've got young guys helping out, but they rely on that size, strength, and experience to take you down the stretch. So if you have that throughout an entire season, I think it does make a big difference. And it's just a matter of keeping guys around long enough and together long enough to get there and playing with one another to do it.
I couldn't have said it better myself there, Max. And that kind of leads us to the curious question with St. Cloud, because, again, the free fall continues.
Yeah.
This one a little bit, it still stings, right? If you're a Huskies fan, so we're going up a top 5 team of Western Michigan, who we've talked about it almost every single week. This team is for real. You talk about the balance. You talk about goaltending. The Broncos have it all. A 4-0 victory on Friday, shutting out the Huskies. And then Saturday, kind of a surprise there. And I want to ask you this, Max, because we actually in our group chat was asking, hey, is Isaac Posh close? And you had mentioned, hey, is he traveling with the squad? Has he been practicing? And he was. Everything that I was hearing was that the target was Colorado College, because the Huskies do have a bye week coming up here this weekend. And we'll also say it this way: it's much needed for a multitude of reasons. But we saw him start on Saturday. And Max, were you surprised to see Posh in the net on Saturday in Western Michigan?
Yeah, it kind of felt rushed to me, but it's also one of those things that if not now, when? I mean, they're desperate for wins, and maybe that's a guy that even if he's not playing at 100% can spark the rest of the team just seeing him out there. And it's not uncommon for a hockey coach to kind of gamble with those odds and just say, hey, if you have to play more stand-up hockey or you can't push off of one direction, that's fine. We'll kind of tier or shape our game to force people to the other side, or make it a little bit easier on you that direction. And it just didn't end up working out for him. But yeah, I mean, I didn't expect to see Posh until at least Colorado College, because it's very similar to the NFL or many of these other leagues. When you've got that built-in break coming up, you want to take advantage of it, especially for your A tier or your hypercritical players. And I would certainly consider Posh in that group for St. Cloud.
100%. So he goes in, he plays 40 minutes, and he was pulled after 2 periods because, unfortunately for Huskies fans, Western Michigan, again, the offense just continues to hum there for the Broncos. Again, outscored on the weekend 10-1. It was a 6-1 finish there on Saturday in Lawson. Again, it's a very tough place to play, as you mentioned it, Max. And this was the fear, really, with St. Cloud, was when we got to midway through January, when it just seemed that the team was finding different ways to essentially not win a hockey game, right? It's one
Right.
thing where, and I know it, and it drove me nuts, and I think it drove you a bit crazy too, where all the talk on social media was, well, Isaac Posh, and therefore equals Huskies are losing.
Right.
He was back in the net on Saturday, and again, it's been the lack of offense, right? Austin Bernovic was the goal scorer. He's your freshman goal scorer. And essentially has been carrying the mail. I think he's up to now either 13 goals on the season, for a freshman, which is pretty darn impressive. But if you go the rest of the score sheet with St. Cloud, there's a big gap between him and number 2.
Right.
So that's a problem, right? So to all the naysayers out there, did Saturday also prove that St. Cloud just might be a flawed team in a sense, right? Where, and again, there was so much more expected of guys like Adam Ingram. I think Josh Zinger was hoping to have more production from the back end. He hasn't had that, and you put that together, it kind of shows you that St. Cloud up and down its lineup, minus some injuries, also with the goaltending. Is it fair to say that maybe early into the season were they playing with fool's gold a little bit?
Yeah, it could be. I think, you look at Schlossman's articles and some of the podcasts that he does, and he talks about teams' luck or puck luck, or I forgot which terminology he uses, but more or less, their expected goals or wins versus what they're actually sitting at for goals and wins. And St. Cloud he went through the whole NCHC. They were right on pace. So they were playing either a different style of hockey with more energy, or I'm not sure what it ended up being for the difference now, but it hasn't tailed off. They are on the more unlucky side right now, so that certainly is playing a part. But when you're losing, 4-0 or 6-1 on weekends like this, I don't know that you can attribute either of those losses to luck more so than just kind of getting beat out there. And I'll say having Posh come back early doesn't necessarily bother me. And I don't think that it was necessarily something that you expected him to lose or play poorly. But having him come back against that Western Michigan team and the offense that they have might have been a tougher challenge than would be an ideal scenario. You're never going to be able to schedule it for Miami unless it all lines up perfectly. And I don't mean to throw shots at Miami. It's just, somebody that's a lot easier to contain and control. And you can throw maybe North Dakota in there at times, but Western Michigan, with the speed that they've got and the skill, is a little bit of a different animal for a goaltender that hasn't played in forever and is rusty in his own right, but also coming off of an injury.
Yeah, it is tough, and it doesn't get easier, as we talked about it, Max. So St. Cloud, an off week this weekend, and then they will be at home against Colorado College, another team that's kind of had a curious season. I think that's the nicest way to say it. But then the Huskies go on the road to face Denver, who seem to kind of finding their stride a bit back here the second half of the home schedule here. And then they finish at home against, again, the Bulldogs. So there's nothing easy, right? So if you're the Huskies, and as you mentioned, Miami, again, this is no disrespect to Anthony Noreen and that team over there, because they're going to be a different team. I can just tell you that Miami, with the amount of commits that they have, that team is going to turn a direction in a couple of seasons. But if you're looking for, as you mentioned, a weekend where you could feel some confidence that you could get a W, there really isn't one there, right?
Right.
And granted, the NCHC really is that every weekend if you really ask the players and the coaching staff, and to their credit, they're not wrong, right? Even Miami gave St. Cloud fits earlier in the season, and they made that close. In fact, their only NCHC point came from taking the Huskies to overtime at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. So, bigger picture, though, for the NCHC, Max, and I think this is kind of the big thing, is at one point, 1 through, was it 8, were within, what, 6 to 7 points?
Yeah.
Just about what, that was a month ago or so, right? It wasn't that far ago. Now things have really kind of sectioned them off into essentially 3, we'll call it 4 tiers, right? Your first tier is Western Michigan in first place at 40 points. How about this Nebraska Omaha, a team that a lot of people picked to be in the top 4? Didn't really show it early, but they really turned it around. They're actually tied with Arizona State with 37 points in a second place realm there. North Dakota rounds out the top 4 at 28, so it's a 9-point advantage between third and fourth place. And then Denver right behind them at 27, CC at 24. So that's tier number 2. Tier 3 is us two. It's the Bulldogs at 19 points, St. Cloud at 15, and then Miami lonely all the way down at 9 at 1 point. So really have separated, shall we say, the men from the boys here, if we're going to be, kind of frank about it. Are you a bit surprised of where the teams are right now? Is there any team that surprised you, both in terms of up and down, or is there anything that you're like, no, this makes sense?
Yeah, I would say tier 2, which is, just generally about 10 points behind the back half of tier 1 there, is what I expected tier 1 to be coming into the year. And tier 3 is probably where I expected to be tier 2, and tier 1 is where I expected to be tier 3. So it is all kind of shifted, just moving tier 3 from the beginning of the season to the top of the board there. And that has, a lot to do with that Western team having a lot more offense than anybody probably expected them to, outside of, Kalamazoo. And Omaha having a hell of a resurgence here. I don't think that anybody expected them to be a bad team, especially with how they finished last year. But I don't know that anybody also expected them to be second in the NCHC and gaining, a national ranking again and fighting for a playoff spot. But yeah, I think that tier 2 teams, as we're calling them right now, of North Dakota, Denver, and Colorado College, all kind of fighting for that last home ice spot is surprising to me. And if you're listening to the North Dakota fans online, none of them really want that home ice spot anymore, because they seem to be losing an awful lot when they're playing at the Ralph. And I can't disagree with them. They seem to be a different team when they're playing on the road. Like, they play with a little bit more urgency and fire. So we'll see how that finishes out. I know it kind of goes against everything a coach will ever tell you in terms of where you want to be playing, because you kind of want to control your own destiny and be able to follow some sort of a rhythm. But at this point, I don't know that any of them are going to be fighting it too hard.
No, and at the end of the day, right, it's Minnesota Wild 2.0, right? They're just a team that's, for whatever reason, the best in the NHL on the road, and at home, sub 500. And tell me how that works, right? It doesn't make sense. What does make sense, though, at least to the folks that follow college hockey, is where we're at in the pairwise, right? And again, this is the time of the year where we really get deep into this, right? So for the NCHC, as of right now, it is Western Michigan at 5, it is Denver at 10, and then Arizona State at 13. So if it ended today, 2 teams would be essentially guaranteed a spot. Arizona State is on the bubble as an at-large bid. And then if somehow, some way, another team in the NCHC was able to sort of win the tournament outright, there could be as high as 4 teams. But Max, as it sits right now, there was some talk this year that the NCHC could have 4 or 5 teams. In fact, especially when we go back to the preseason rankings,
Yeah.
Colorado College was in the top 10, right? St. Cloud State was in that 12 range. There were, if I think 5 or 6 teams in
6
the
in the
top
top
20,
20. Yeah.
right? And right now, it may be as little as 3 teams, if not maybe 2, that get into the to the NCAA tournament for the NCHC. Is that more of the St. Cloud side of the equation, where just some teams are just aren't playing up to what we normally see? Or is this also something where if I'm from the East Coast, I'm watching college hockey from afar, is this a case of where the NCHC is just kind of beat up on each other, and this is kind of the end result of that? Which one do you think it is?
I think it's certainly a little bit of both. And I don't mean to take the cop out answer there, and that's certainly what it is. But the Hockey East teams, for the most part, dominated their non-conference play. And so even though that they do beat up on each other, like BU's loss to Merrimack was overshadowed by their win of the Beanpot against BC, and that was something that you're not going to hear on the weekend overall. But they don't have impeccable records or anything. It's just the fact that those teams won in the other conference standings, whereas the NCHC kind of went 500 in a lot of their games that ended up mattering. So yeah, it's going to be the first year where I think we really only have 3 NCHC teams in the playoffs. I don't think that we're able to sneak any more out there based on the remaining schedules here. And there's a chance that we don't have 3 at all. We could just have 2, because as it stands right now, your 14, 15, 16 are going to go to your conference winners for the CCHA, Atlantic Hockey, and the ECAC, because none of those teams are in the top 16 currently. That could change. Quinnipiac is right on that bubble range, but as it stands right now, that's kind of where we sit. And then if any one team wins their conference tournament that's not currently in the top 16 for either Hockey East or the Big Ten, that's going to bump Arizona State out if it ended right now as well. So that's how you lose that third position there. And the fact that it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Hockey East teams, if Massachusetts goes on a little bit of a run, is kind of insane. And I don't know that we've seen that since we've gone to these revised conferences. And it would result, I should say, in some interconference matchups in that first round. And it's something that's gonna, if you thought there was controversy before about how the seeding went down, the interconference matchups and trying to avoid some of them, but not all of them, and kind of picking and choosing who has to play each other, whereas you had an excuse to separate them before, it's going to drive people nuts come time to release the bracket this time around. So I'm excited to see it. I'm disappointed that the NCHC isn't going to have more representation, just as a little bit of a homer there, but it's going to drive conversation, which is good for the sport. So I love it.
It'll drive conversation for sure, because also what's happening this spring, Max, and I want to get your take on this, is the final year that the frozen face-off of the NCHC will be at a neutral site, which is the XL Energy Center. Starting next season, it will be on home ice sheets. And I asked Eric Rude about this, and he mentioned that, and mind you, St. Cloud State assistant coach, and he said, you know what, it was a spectacle, right? And I think the coaches and the players from all over the conference, you're playing at an NHL barn that's still world class, even though it's due for some updating, we'll put it that way. But more so, again, I mean, the ice is great. Fans will come out. They do come out, right? And it made it seem, it kind of matched what it represented, right? It represented, this is the end of the season. This is big time hockey. You're playing in an NHL barn, and that's not going to be there anymore. It's going to be at home sites. So as much as we have been advocates, and I know I've been a strong advocate for the NCAA to go to home sites, now that I'm seeing this in the last shot at the XL Energy Center, I don't know if I'm having second guesses about it, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, I get it. But also, this is an NHL barn, whereas the NCAA regionals were at American Hockey League buildings. You're barely, maybe, I hate to say it, but the participation / the attendance is far from what it should be, right? So I understand the push, but going back to the original question for you, Max, is, are you going to miss the NCHC tournament played in downtown St. Paul?
Selfishly, being from the area, yeah, because it's right down the road. I can go there, take an Uber, it'd take me $20 to get over there, and that's totally fine for the night. So that's certainly part of it. And I do think, as you mentioned there, the NCHC is in a bit of a different position than most of these other conferences, given that it is a generally central location for a lot of the teams. It's certainly a decent drive for everybody but St. Cloud. St. Cloud is I guess St. Thomas, when they come in, will be the closest, but currently St. Cloud is the closest there, and everybody else is going to have a bit of a road trip. UMD and North Dakota can certainly make it in the same day if they absolutely had to, weather conditions provided. But yeah, I would say that your ECAC team doesn't have a place that would be easy to commandeer for them. They don't have a tradition of doing that. Atlantic hockey, same type of thing. They're all generally or relatively close in proximity, but they just don't have something that's willing to give up that space with that capacity during that time. So I understand why colleges and the NCHC hockey in general is going towards the home ice, and I know why it's a good thing overall. I selfishly am going to miss it just a little bit. Now, with that being said, I do think that the people of Lawson, while they've still got that arena, are deserving of that home ice advantage and atmosphere when they're playing as well as they are this year. It's a shame that they're not going to get it this year, and hopefully they can kind of replicate it next year as well. But you see some of the students that show out and like to travel for the sport, and it shows way better than it does at the Excel, just because it's got so much capacity that even if you get 10,000 fans in there, that's half empty. And so what might be incredible for a college hockey game attendance looks not as great on camera, and even when you're sitting there in the venue, because it's not a packed house. So I totally get it, and I support the change. But like I said, selfishly, I'm going to miss it a little bit because it makes it a little bit longer for me to travel.
It does. But that brings me to a kind of a funny question here, Max, because UMD, they've been a successful team. They've won some national championships in their heyday. And I'm kind of curious, have you ever thought about what a home NCHC championship game would look like at Amsoil?
I think it would be a ton of fun. We get that kind of atmosphere when North Dakota comes to town. They travel incredibly well. When St. Cloud and UMD are both playing very well, that barn is packed with both of those teams. We see a few people come around from your Western Michigan, but when you're talking about a playoff game, every one of their fans that is kind of dedicated is going to make that trip. And Amsoil has a large enough rink where they can kind of accommodate that. It certainly doesn't have the capacity of, the Ralph or some of these other significantly larger barns in the Big Ten or other places, but it's by no means a small rink in the college hockey world. Colorado College has a nice, good one as well. It's going to be a different atmosphere, and I kind of welcome that opportunity to have Duluth fans show up and show out. And I'll be the first one to admit UMD fans sometimes need a little bit of kick in the pants to get going, and getting the barn full of an opposing team's fans does it faster than anything else. So I welcome it. I know that the players would love it a lot more to get a little bit more energy in there on both sides, and it's going to be a lot more fun. I think overall, getting to see players want to show out in front of the home crowd and everything else. So I think the impact and sites at Amsoil is going to be something that's familiar. We do see it for the women's NCAA tournaments that are held there, but on the men's side is going to be very fun as well.
That it is. Speaking of fun here, Max, let's take a look ahead the upcoming weekend, right? First of all, maybe before we get to that, we mentioned the Bean Pot earlier again. How about that? That was, oh boy, BU taking that one. That was fun. Hot. And how about former #1 overall pick from San Jose, Macklin Celebrini, waving the BU flag in the building there in Boston, as BU is able to secure again another Bean Pot championship. Another couple of tidbits here to want to get to before we get to previewing the NCHC weekend is the CCHA a little bit closer to home. Minnesota State sweeping Augustana, who these were two teams we talked about a couple of months ago, Max, as teams that could kind of impress, and they've emerged as the two teams in the CCHA. And at least as of right now, from this last weekend, it's Minnesota State's conference to lose right now, was it not?
Yeah, absolutely. With that sweep over Augustana, it essentially secures their bid at the McNaughton Cup. The only caveat to that being if Augustana wins out and Minnesota State loses out, obviously that's going to change. But assuming that they win at the pace that they've been on in conference to this point, I think that does lock it up for Minnesota State here, which is, great for them. And I think the state of hockey and everything else in general, it does kind of stomp out what was a very fun story in Augustana, and a rule change that the CCHA made that they could win based on winning percentage in conference alone, which is could have driven a couple of conversation points and numbers along the way. But yeah, it's something that I think people are going to be a lot more familiar with and receptive to, seeing Minnesota State maybe win that conference and be the representative from the CCHA in the national tournament. But it doesn't mean that Augustana can't necessarily win that postseason tournament either. So I wouldn't count them out yet in terms of playing aggressively. But yeah, I think the Mavericks have it pretty much locked up and just kind of waiting the clock out on this one.
And what a season it was for Augustana, coming in first full year members, even though they only had a half of a conference schedule. They showed that under Garrett Raboyne there, and led by some great goaltending, number one Josh Kotai. This team has got some solid foundations to build upon, and they're going to be a force in that conference for years to come. Another couple of matchups here, Max, Michigan State was fun. They both split on that weekend. And then, well, the fun is over if you're Wisconsin, right? They were as high as, I think, 17 or 18 in the pairwise. Penn State put a dead stop to that comeback. Wisconsin, I think, dropped back to 22 in the, yes, they did, 22 in the pairwise. So almost essentially halting an at-large bid for the Badgers. But again, as we talked about it, if you go on to win the Big Ten tournament, which that means you got to get through somehow Minnesota, Michigan State, it's a tough task. Does that mean they can do it? Sure. So let me ask you that, Max. Could Wisconsin make a run in the Big Ten tournament, or is there just too much firepower up top? Or I think essentially their luck is going to run out.
Yeah, I think what's funny about the Big Ten tournament is that the number one seed and their bye that they get has traditionally not fared all that well for that team. So if Wisconsin gets put in that, bottom half, that side of the bracket where they can win one series and then make it on to facing off against the number one seed Minnesota, I think it would be at this time, or Michigan State. At this time, then maybe you catch a team that's a little bit rusty and you can go on from there. But yeah, I would say that it's all but over at this point. I don't think that they're going to be getting an at-large bid. Mathematically, I still think it's technically possible. I'd have to go to get the pairwise probability matrix and take a look at that and see what they would need to do it. But just based on who they've got left on the schedule and losing, getting swept 2 weekends in a row is going to be a tough thing to overcome. So credit to them for the turnaround that they had this year after a brutal start to the season.
1-9.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just one of those things that maybe they ran out of gas a little bit here in terms of racking up those wins. So yeah, like I said, the dream's not dead, but making it as an at-large bid is certainly probably out the window at this time. And I'm familiar with that. So again, no disrespect to them,
but hey, they made it interesting, right? I think back even in November, I said it, that Wisconsin was done, and there was a lot of disappointment around the Badger squad under second-year head coach Mike Hastings. There were questions of what was maybe happening with Wisconsin and maybe behind closed doors. They certainly turned a corner with a fury, and again, back-to-back weekends, and it shows you in college hockey, and we talked about this a lot, right, where in the pairwise, it's so difficult to climb up the ladder, but very easy to take one slip, and it slips you back quite a bit. So Max, that leaves us with one last thing on the agenda is the Bulldogs are in action this weekend. They will be hosting a very good Arizona State Sun Devil team that has been absolutely rolling. Another really good weekend against Denver University and Tempe this weekend. And I really kind of think, Max, simply said, compared to last year, right? Arizona State had over 20 wins, but we kind of scoffed at them and said, well, your opponents weren't great. Yeah, you didn't deserve to make it in the tournament. I don't care how many wins you have, right?
Right.
They are taking our words and putting our foot in them with the way and the opponents that they have beaten this year. This is a good hockey squad. And even talking to Brad Schlossman in intermission a couple weekends ago when North Dakota was in town for St. Cloud, he said, you know what, I kind of had a feeling this team could be good because he does essentially a roster / line chart prediction before the season starts. And he looked at all the upperclassmen that Arizona State brought in this year. And he said, nope, this team could be good if they can gel together. And I will say the body work speaks for itself, doesn't it, Max?
Yeah, definitely. Arizona State to hockey is what Florida State to football wishes they were this year. They had they got denied last season, and they were like, they were told it's your schedule. You didn't beat anybody. You don't deserve this, that, and the other thing. They came back the next season and they laid an egg. Meanwhile, Arizona comes back this year and they're lighting the world on fire a little bit. You talk about beating Denver 3 times out of 4 on the season, and the one time that they lost is in overtime here. Granted, one of their wins is in overtime as well, but that's an aside. It's something to witness and just say this is exactly what the NCHC wanted when they brought a team like Arizona State in. They knew that they were going to get some of the players that other NCHC schools like Western Michigan or Miami or Omaha or whoever probably weren't going to have an opportunity at. The players that might not be a traditional homer or a homeschooled kid that wants to go play for the local club or whatever. They've got no allegiances or loyalties. They're from California or Canada or all these other places that might not have college hockey anywhere near them, whereas Arizona State is welcoming to those guys. Not that any of the ones aren't, but in a way that they didn't have that growing up around them either. So they're made of all sorts of misfits is a wrong, an inappropriate term for that, but it seems like it kind of fits them in an endearing way. So
Yep.
And it's an alluring, it's an attractive campus in terms of the weather and not having to deal with some of the things that you do in other northern climates or middle America climates. And so it's worked out really well for them. Sustainability yet to be seen, but I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be able to continue on. So more power to them and all credit to them. I know I kind of dogged them a little bit before about another maroon and gold club kind of joining UMD and Denver and Western to some extent, even though it's brown and whatever. But I love it. I love having more of that fire and offensive focus in the NCHC, because traditionally we've been a conference that values more of the big bodies and physicality, and that's worked out well for us so far. But seeing that different style of play is very, very fun.
It really, really is. And let's put it this way. They know how to put the puck in the net. We'll
Yeah.
put it plain and simple. Predictions for this weekend, Max. They're going to be a tough go. That team can transition. They skate well. They get good goaltending. 6'6" goaltender is on their roster. So there's not a ton of net to shoot at. But Bulldogs, again, some young talent. They've been getting better weekend after week out, despite what we see as results in the scoreboard. So what do you think happens?
Yeah, if UMD can put it up 92 shots again, I like their chances. I don't know that they'll be able to find, enough possession of the puck to put up that 92 number. But, Arizona State just split with Denver. UMD, in the last time they played Denver, just split with them. Not that one is equal to the other, but there's something to be said about UMD's ability to transition and kind of play a little bit of chameleon puck, and you just have to find the right level of play and the right style of play for it to work out for you. And I think Arizona State wanting to play that fast, offensively focused game might fit a little bit more of what UMD can do right now. Maybe not what Sandelin wants to do, but just with the roster that he's got and who's producing right now, I think it does fit a little bit more to what UMD could take advantage of. So it's going to require, whether it's Knapp or Guyon in the net there, it's going to require one of them to steal a game there. But a split's not unreasonable. I don't think UMD finds a way to sweep Arizona State. As cool as it would be, I think it would be an incredible storyline. Don't think it would do much for UMD either in the NCHC standings or the pairwise. Fun story, but I would say that a split is realistically attainable for them and kind of what they should be shooting for. And that's what my guess is going to be.
It'll be a tough go against the Sun Devils, who have just been, for lack of a better phrase, they've been on fire down there in Tempe at Mullet Arena. Other matchups in the NCHC, Omaha is on the road to take on Western Michigan in Kalamazoo. North Dakota also traveling to Denver at Magnus Arena, and Miami will be just to the north of Denver to take on the Tigers of Colorado College against St. Cloud on a bye week, and probably a much needed bye week there for the Huskies, who just simply cannot find a W. But still a lot of great weekend action here on Valentine's Day weekend. So Max, with that being said, any parting thoughts?
No, I was just gonna say it's all coming down to Valentine's Day here. So if you're looking for something to do, I'm sure everybody's significant others, whether it's girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, whatever, they would love nothing more than to go with you to some college hockey. So find a game near you and go check it out, and hopefully it's a good one.
I think couldn't say it better myself here, Max. Safe travels there as you are nearer to the East Coast than you are back to the Midwest. And that will do it for this episode of NCHC and MNCAA. On Nick Maxson for Max Veech. We'll see you back here next week.